In chapter 8, we talked about ways and means of arriving at that silence, which is actually next to our true nature of bliss. So Sat Chit Anand, and silence is the next closest, subtlest thing to that bliss. So chapter 8, verse 14. Ananyachetah satatam yo mam smarati nityashah tasyaham sulabah partha nityayuktasya yoginah. There's always a time when we never realize where the mind has wandered off all by itself, as if it has a mind of its own, and then disciplining it becomes another task. So then we turn to the scriptures as to what we should be doing right. So, for example, Mullah Nasruddin was seen mounted on his donkey, of course, and rushing through the marketplace and rushing down this street and that street and then the other, and suddenly someone said, "Hey, Mullah Nasruddin, what are you in such a hurry about? Where is it that you're rushing?" And Mullah Nasruddin said, "I don't know, ask the donkey." Why? Because he had given free rein to the donkey. And why is that? Because he said, "Oh, I have given him the reins, I have given him the decision, because every time I found that when we entered the marketplace, this donkey used to get very excited about all the sounds and colors and the activities there, and he would rush about madly, and I couldn't control it. So one fine day I said, okay, whenever we are passing through the marketplace, I'm going to let him do what he wants. And therefore, if you ask me, where am I going? What am I doing here? I don't know. Ask the donkey." So our minds are like that. So we have given free rein to the mind, and very often it is excited with the sounds and smells and activities and relationships and ideas of the world, which are actually very attractive, no doubt, but they seem to abduct us. Those ideas, they abduct the mind, and then we are also abducted into that new world of sights and sounds and ideas, and new experiences, and vyakti, vastu, paristhiti, ghatnaएं, new experiences, and we are forever in search of the new. Now the mind gets a taste for it, just like the donkey, and the mind gets a taste for new experiences. Once you have a new experience, then it says, can I have a variation of it, a bit of a variety of it? And therefore that taste of rushing about the marketplace in great excitement, like Mullah Nasruddin's donkey, is the way our mind behaves. So when he is asked, where are you rushing? If somebody asks us, where are you rushing? We should be able to say, I don't know, ask my mind. Because Mullah Nasruddin said, I don't know really, I seem to be in a great rush, but I'm mounted on a donkey. Perhaps you should ask the donkey, because he seems to be in control. The whole thing is that the donkey of Mullah Nasruddin and the mind that we are riding on seems to be in control. How can we hand over the reins of ourselves to a mind which is so fickle, a mind which is so capricious? It's not very stable, and it seems to fluctuate with every changing paristhiti, with every changing situation, and the mind seems to fluctuate and feel depression, dejected or elated with every changing relationship or experience and paristhiti. So it's a fluctuating mind let loose in a fluctuating, changing, unstable mind. Is that the quality of our life? Certainly not. I'm sure as human beings we have a claim to a better life, and therefore disciplining that donkey of Mullah Nasruddin, or the mind that we are riding on, which is the same thing, seems to be the purpose of meditation. Now, what is it that the donkey is doing, Mullah Nasruddin? He is giving more and more attention to the sansar. Oh, this idea, oh, that experience, oh, this food stall, and he is rushing about happily, of course, with great happiness. You cannot deny that. And therefore, this disciplining of the mind is not there. What happens is that our attention is all on sansar, And if our attention is handed over to the sansar, what is going to happen? We have handed over our happiness to the world. So every fluctuating paristhithi, situation, experience is going to toss the quality of our mind. So we are going to be tossed about like a football actually, which we are off and on. You can see in the morning I got up in a good mood, and then later in the afternoon someone said something, and I kept mulling over what made that person say something so nasty, and my mind was dejected. In the evening someone invited me out and said, oh, how nice is your video, and I was elated again, and by evening I was feeling lonely. What is this? Is this a way to live? Right through the day, if you watch, just at the end of the day, if we watch how many emotions we have been through, like a roller coaster ride. And what is that roller coaster ride dependent on? Dependent on all the inputs from the outer world, from people and what they said, and or maybe even a remembrance of what they said. So it could be a memory, a memory of some situation or paristhithi. That roller coaster ride of our mind is abducting us because of the inputs from the outer world. Now, meditation is not is a way of making sure that the world doesn't consume us. The moment we hand over the reins of our mind to the world will consume us. And therefore, it has been said that when we are seated in silence, that quiet is what is going to conserve our Pran Shakti, that vital force, which is a part of our spiritual heritage. And that vital force, that Pran Shakti, can then be channelized into realizing the highest truth, or at least contemplating on it, or meditating on it, or taking a mantra help, the help of a mantra. We talked about mantra, the power of mantra. So if meditation takes us into silence, and mantra is another way of creating a conduit, a kind of a connection with that highest truth. It's a conduit. It's a way of quelling the chatter of the mind and then reaching us to that same silence. It's only in that silence that one can hope to realize the ultimate truth, because there is no other way. And Adi Shankaracharya has already warned us over and over again that if mechanically we are practicing Havan and Puja and Upasana and activities and festivals, and with that that feverish kind of enthusiasm, it doesn't matter how feverishly enthusiastic you are about the pujas and archanas and all. Finally, we have to remember what is being symbolized by all that. So, he has said all the mechanical outward activity will remain in the gross world, because we are using the gross body to perform those actions. What is the need of the subtlest truth? The subtlest truth needs a subtle action. And that subtle action can be silence. Now, meditation is not an action. Meditation is a state. Some people think meditation is an action. I'm going to sit still and then I'm going to focus my mind. Yes, for beginners, yes, that's needed. It's like primary school. But later on, we realize that, meditation is not an action. It's a state of being. It's a zone. It's a realm of being. It's like a lifestyle. It's not an action. Okay? Now, so the mind now, instead of being supported on a donkey mind, why donkey mind? Actually, I'm calling it donkey because of the reference to Mullah Nasruddin, but otherwise popularly, all over the world, it is referred to as the monkey mind. You must have seen it in all the corporate literature. Where is the monkey mind? Where is the monkey mind? So because of the restlessness of the monkey. Okay, so the thought patterns need a support, and the thought patterns can be supported by, it's like holding on to a pillar or holding on to something on the deck of a ship when you're tossed about it, and you're not as skilled as the captain of the ship, who can balance in the worst of storms and even light a cigarette in a squall. When the wind is blowing in a squall, you can see he can light his cigarette and stand steady as a rock on a ship deck. No, we can't do that. We are not practiced enough. We are not that. We are not the Mahatma of the spiritual world. So what do we need? We need to hang on to something. and hang on to that nearest rail over there, and that is the japa, Nam japa of any Nam actually. You can take it from Islam, from Buddhism, but why do we take it from our religion? Because there is a sense of Shraddha and Astha attached to it. Okay, that's why if your mind identifies with Shiva, good enough. Identifies with Krishna, good enough. You feel that he is my symbol of that supreme, or Ram. Because in our mind we have divinized these figures. It's not as if those figures, they're not figures first of all, they are the principle of truth. But since they have been personalized like Ram, Krishna, Shiva and all, we think that they are divine beings who are going to give us divinity. No, it's the other way around. We have created these images of Ram, Krishna and all the different prophets of the different religions, so that with our mind we can divinize them. We divinize them in the sense we believe that they stand for the highest truth. And when you are convinced, it becomes so. That's what happens in temples. You're convinced that this idol there stands for that highest truth. And therefore, that idol, over years and years of worship, becomes divinized. Do you see the paradox? We, with our minds, are divinizing these symbols. And therefore, the support of the japa, the support of mantra, the support of meditation. Otherwise, we are aware, and Yoga Shastra has told us ample number of times that our pran and our body, mind and intellect, that monkey mind, the famous monkey mind, and pran, both are interdependent. So the disturbance in one will cause a disturbance in the other. It's automatic. So if I'm disturbed about something outside, my breath will be disturbed, and if my breath is too quick and too harsh, and the mind will become similarly rajasic. So they are interdependent, and disturbance in one causes disturbance in the other. So what's the solution? Asana, sit still, meditation. So being able to be in asana means the seat of meditation. The ability to be in asana for hours together with the back straight and with the breath completely equalized for hours together is the ability of the spiritual seeker, just like the ability of that skilled captain, that experienced captain, to stand steady on the deck of a ship during a storm. And there is a storm blowing all around us anyway. There are people and situations and professional ups and downs and financial ups and downs, all kinds of things, and then travel problems, and then some new desires. In the midst of that, some new desire pops up. That's the worst of it all. As if the world was not enough, my mind also creeps in a few more of its own new desires. So to add to the compound the whole issue, like I want a new gown or a new dress or a new job opportunity and maybe a new diamond necklace. I don't know what. The mind unnecessarily crops up a new desire that adds to all the new disturbance. So do I have the ability in that storm? This is the storm of letting in the squall of the world. In that stormy weather, asana and meditation becomes the practice. Ask any captain. Did he get to that point the first time he was a cadet and he boarded a ship and he stood on the deck of the ship and then the ship was caught in a squall? Ask him that experience and he will tell you how tough it was. That's how tough it is. We are at that stage of our spiritual life, and all the inputs, the sensory inputs of the world are completely free. We have allowed them to be freely invading us. So, is it possible then to give up our actions and our activities in the world? Of course not. Nothing of the sort is being suggested at all. We are saying, and the scriptures are saying, and Krishna is telling Arjun that look, you are in this battle. In this battle, Arjun, can you keep a steady mind and do the actions that are required to be done, because you have to fight this battle, it is for dharma, and we have all our duties and dharma marked out for us, just like Arjun. Just complete all the dharma, the duties that you are expected to do and all the actions should come from the seat of silence. Can you do it like that? So it sounds like a Maharathi, a real master of meditation. All the actions being done from the seat of silence. From that seat of silence, can you still continue to act in the world? Yes, I need practice. I need years and years of experience. I need not only experience, but I need to first take the help of a scripture or a master, and then the ball is in my court. What do I do next? So in verse 14 it is said, Ananyachetasa satatam yo mam smarati nityashah tasyaham sulabah patha nityayuktasya yoginah. Now the ball is in your court, and Krishna's favorite words, they occur again and again. Ananyachetasa satatam and nityashah. If you are not constant in your practice, so all the sailors in the world, if they go out and do their drill only once a year, can you trust them with your ship? No, of course not. Can you trust them to take your cargo or your family across the ocean? Of course not. Then how do we expect ourselves to cross this ocean of the material world into the spiritual ocean? So how do we expect to cross that into the spiritual world unless we are getting into the drill and practice like any other soldier, yes, spiritual foot soldiers, unless we are satatam, constant, nityashah, steadfast in what we have, in what we are convinced is our practice of silence and mantra and japa and meditation and contemplation. What do I contemplate on if I don't know the Gyan? So first of all is the Shravanam, to listen to the truth, which we are doing of course right now. So Satatam Nityashah, Bhagavan says, sorry, you can't do without that. So it's like a mobile. So Bhagavan says, okay, I've given you a mobile, which means a body and a mind and an intellect. What do you do with it? अगर आप उसको ट्यून नहीं कर रहे हैं और वो वाईफाई के अंदर है ही नहीं रेंज में, तो फिर भगवान बार बार याद दिलाते हैं, अरे भाई रेंज में आइए, आई कांट हियर यू, रेंज में आइए, रेंज में आइए. I can hear you, I can have a, God is saying, I can have a conversation with you if अगर आप रेंज में तो आइए पहले. तो वो वाईफाई जो है ना वो हमारे रेंज में नहीं है, क्योंकि we are so happy with this shiny mobile, that is our body, and we are so busy with the upkeep of this mobile shiny body that it should always be clean and covered and looking for new shiny covers for it, covers, odna, and also keeping some of its apps, updating the apps all the time. Yes, we are updating our knowledge of the world, दुनिया में क्या हो रहा है, मेरे profession में क्या हो रहा है. We are updating everything except our spiritual self. So भगवान said, रेंज में आइए, जरा रेंज में आइए, तब तो थोड़ा conversation शुरू होगा हमारे साथ. But for that, it's not an occasional, and Chinmaya ji never fails to remind us that this conversation with God is not a weekly affair. He says, your prayer or your thought of God, that is God meaning the highest truth, is not a Friday affair or a Monday or a Tuesday affair or a Sunday mass. It is actually something which Nityashah should remain with you in and through your activities. And how will that happen? Because first, in the beginning, we have to remind ourselves. Because when we keep listening to the same truth over and over again, somehow it rings in the mind, and then we are reminded of it now and then. And at some point, we are reminded of it even in conversation with others. Even when we are interacting with someone who is very obnoxious or disturbing, say, for example, in the office or in the neighborhood, that thought comes to the mind from somewhere because we have embedded it in the subconscious by listening to the scriptures. That thought comes to us that, oh, I am consciousness. Why am I getting into this scuffle or a bout of anger? Why am I getting into this? And the moment there is a reminder, it drops. So that's how it happens until it becomes second nature, until it becomes our swabhava. This is not rocket science. This is the way every skill takes place. In the beginning, there is practice, there is remembrance, and we have to be reminded where is the gear, on which side is the first gear or the fifth gear or the reverse gear. We are mentally practicing it. Now we do it automatically. This thought that I am consciousness, I am not going to get involved in a noisy world, or at least not going to be fluctuated, or let the world consume the quality of my silence, is a thought that will become automatic. Hopefully, we are still hoping that we will reach that state. But that is a promise Bhagavan has made with the word Satatam Nityashaha. That steadfastness and constant practice is your baby. You have to do it. So what do? We practice meditation once in a while in the beginning, and then maybe once in a week, a little later, and then maybe once in a day. But the real Maharishis, you know what they do? They have one meal a day, and they meditate twice a day. Of course, the ones in the Himalayas, they meditate all day. But when we are reaching that high state, we are told, meditate twice a day and eat one meal a day. And what are we doing? The opposite. So we have more than one meal a day, more than 2 meals sometimes, full meal, and meditation once. So it's the reverse order. In fact, the caustic language which Chinmayaji was very fond of using, he would say that prayer is not a DDT. DDT is that anti-termite thing or something, some kind of a medicine, some kind of a chemical. Prayer is not a DDT to be sprayed once in a way so that all your bad thoughts go away. I'm going to the temple, I'm going to be nice and holy and not think of bad thoughts. It's not a DDT that you are spraying. It is Sarveshu Kaleshu Mamanusmaran. Bhagwan himself had said in the 7th verse of 8th chapter, Sarveshu Kaleshu, har vakt mein, har kaal mein, Mamanusmaran. Meri yaad karo na. Remember my identity. I am pure consciousness. You are part of that. So then why Shankaracharya ji also telling us that stay away? Not stay away, of course you should do puja and all, because Man Shuddhi and Chitta Shuddhi and getting our body and mind at least out of the noisy world, from that marketplace. Like Mullah Nasruddin was asked, where are you headed? Ask the donkey. He said, okay, then when are you going to control it? He said, when I get out of this marketplace and I go beyond the city gate, I'm going to be in control again. I'm going to teach this donkey a good lesson. So when we are on the outskirts of the city with the donkey, that is the mind, we are then able, it's like withdrawing, puja, archana and havan and mantra, even mantra to an extent, is a way of bringing the body and mind to a silent place, to a place away from the world. वो market place से कहीं और ले जाने की एक विधि है. And क्योंकि, as we said, the gross cannot obtain the subtlest, and all the activities and actions are done by the gross body. Therefore, they are in the realm of gross. The subtlest truth cannot be reached directly, which means indirect methods are used. We go for Tirth Yatra and Puja, Archana, of course. If these gross methods of ritual and repeated rituals and excessive rituals could give us, could reach us to that highest supreme, then you know who would be the most enlightened people on this planet? Guess who? Why? The pujaris, of course. The pujaris of every temple or every church or every gurudwara or every place of worship. It's the pujari who gets up earliest and does all the rituals and puja and archana, and he's there till the temple shuts down. So don't you think he should be the most enlightened? But he is not, because when I need knowledge and I say I want to know the supreme truth and I want to know what's in the Vedas, what is the essence of my own nature, who am I, what is this Jagat, is it real, what is Brahma? When I ask these 3 questions, the nature of Brahma, Jagat and Jeev, myself, I can't get the answer from the pujari. I have to still find my master, and I go to the master who takes the recourse of the scriptures. And therefore, it's only the scriptures which are revealed by the rishis in every part of, in every religion, by the way, not only Sanatana Dharma. So revealed knowledge is where we have to reach. Now, in verse 15, what is the benefit of this practice of silence and meditation or mantra? What is the benefit? Why should one struggle so hard? So number 15. मामुपेत्य पुनर्जन्म दुःखालयम शाश्वतम् नाप्नुवन्ति महात्मानः संसिद्धिं परमां गताः. Mahatma, in the second line it says, Mahatma is the one who has identified himself already with that eternal truth. That eternal truth he has gained by constant contemplation. How can we contemplate if our ego and our man and our buddhi, mana buddhi and deha, the deha is also looking for comforts and sensuous pleasures. So the deha, man, buddhi, ahankar, these four dacoits put together, four of them are invading our happiness, invading our opportunity of reaching that highest truth, which is our right actually. Now, this contemplation, when the Maharishis or the Mahatmas as it is said, they have still the ego and buddhi, and you know what is the reward they get? Why should we struggle so hard? Because the reward they get is Mamupete Punarjanma. They don't get a Punarjanma. Wow, so lucky. You may say, why? Why is it called lucky? I mean to say, I'm having a fine time. I have a nice time looking forward to some holiday or meeting friends or pursuing some creative activities and hobbies. My profession is going well. I love to see my grandchildren. One might say, why is there this emphasis on no Punarjanma? Because in the first line, in the second phrase, Bhagavan says, because this land where we are enjoying ourselves so much is a Dukkhalaya, and it is a Shashvatam. This is how Bhagavan has described our favorite place to live in, which is the earth, our favorite place. And we say it is a place of fun and frolic and fun. Okay, it is Dukkhalaya, says Bhagavan. Because it is full of, sooner or later, full of imperfections. And we want to be released from feeling that sansari unfulfillment. No matter how far we go, no matter how big our achievements, no matter how much we gain in this world, there is a sense of unfulfillment. We have our grandchildren who are frolicking with us and they bring us so much joy, and then the flowers in the garden. Why not? So at the moment I am happy, but there is a time, and not too far in the future, when the grandchildren are going to have their own life, like our children. They have grown up and they have their own minds, they have their own lives, they have their own ideas, and they have their own pursuits. We are not predominant in their lives anymore. And it's not meant to be that we should be predominant. And therefore that sense of unfulfillment settles into the mind again. It happens with everything, not only children, grandchildren, but everything that we have obtained. So so then we end up struggling to release ourselves from unfulfillment again and again and again. That struggle for release is a part of our Dukh Alaya. Alaya means abode, and Dukh, of course, we know, all too familiar word. Dukh Alaya, the abode of sorrow, is this world. Because the nature of this Dukh Alaya, the abode of sorrow, this world, sansar, is, the nature of it is decay, disease, death, janma mrityu, jara, vyadhi. Who would want to come back? Tell me. All of us, no matter where we are, of course we are in a happy position right now, with a lot of comfort and security and family and everything, but there is always a dread of death, of old age, of disease, of suffering in a hospital. God forbid, this shouldn't happen to anyone, but there is a hidden dread in the back of everyone's mind, and also the dread of losing our dear ones, again to death. Now, if death is something that we fear all the time, Bhagavan says, look, I am releasing you from Janma and Mrityu. So, no Punarjanma means no death again. So, I am giving you that ultimate release from your fears. Isn't that the ultimate freedom? So, from this Dukkhalaya, which is Ashashvatam. Ashashvatam, by now we know this word. It means impermanent, ephemeral, and totally anitya, ashashvatam. This is the world you are living in. I will give you freedom, Krishna says. So he has given one short solution to Arjuna, saying, you follow the path of spirituality, you will never have that sense of unfulfillment and desire-driven world, which is your Dukhalaya. That is the reward of the Mahatma. Because everything that is achieved, we know it. Read any biography. The biographies of the biggest achievers, in the end, they have been in a hospital bed or forgotten somewhere. Or so I was reading about Gayatri Devi, the Maharani of Jaipur, and of course the splendor in which she lived and the fame she achieved, being not only the a princess of Cooch Behar and the queen of Jaipur, Rajasthan at that time. But at the end, just look at her life. She was curled up in a bed in London with hardly anyone around because she had lost her family to drinking, her husband and her two brothers and her son, and all of them had succumbed to excessive drinks or drink-related complications with the body. So there she was, all alone, curled up, looking so vulnerable, so alone. And the only wish in her heart was, I don't want to die in London. Can somebody please take me to Jaipur? Okay, so you're in Jaipur, and then you can breathe your last. Happy? Are you happy to exit the earth? Yes, we are happy. Because in the world beyond, there is no decay, death, disease, unfulfillment, the roller coaster. Bhagavan is saying, hey, I'm going to give you that complete release, complete release. So, who wants to come back? Knowing the nature of this Dukhalaya, if you know the nature of Dukhalaya, who wants to come back, start all over again? Education, then hasratein, ek se ek hasratein hain. I want this, I want that, and the struggle for all those hasratein starts all over again. So there are three kinds of sorrows in the world, and therefore we say Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. For three things, only three things. And all sorrows of the world can be encapsulated in these three categories. So, Adidaivik Dukkha is the Dukkha that comes from natural causes, like storms and earthquakes and maybe even corona or some kind of a pandemic. That is Adidaivik. It just comes from natural disasters. So, Om Shanti. Adi Bhautik comes from this world of people, of the immediate environment, family, friends, neighbors, bosses. Bosses cause a lot of anguish. And the potholes in the neighborhood, the locality, the air pollution, the relatives. Oh God, the list goes on. The Adi Bhautik world is full of, the list is long. And sooner or later something in it. And the taxation, don't forget the taxation. All this causes dukkha. So, Om Shanti. What is the third kind of dukkha? Do you think all the kinds of dukkha that we can ever experience are covered up in these two? The Daivik Apatti, that is the natural disasters, or the world, the environment around, which includes people? No, you will be surprised. There is a third kind of dukkha, and that is called Adhyatmik. Atmik, it comes from ourselves, from our own mind. Our mind is capable of creating a hell within itself, even if the environment and the world outside and the situation is not all that disturbing. It is capable of kama, of passionate desire for something, and krodha if we don't get it, and envy and jealousy, kama, krodha, mad, lobha, moha, matsarya is the hell created by our own mind. This is the third kind of a dukkha emanating from our own mind, Adhyatmik. So, Om Shanti. The three Shantis stand for release from the three kinds of dukkha, and these three cover everything that we suffer from. Don't we want freedom from all these three? Okay, sure. So then he says we can aim for that moksha, where the Mahatma Napnuvanti, he will not gain Punarjan. And what will he gain? Samsiddhim Paramam Gataha. He goes to that highest perfection called moksha. So isn't that attractive enough goal for us? Yes, I suppose so. It's attractive enough. So Bhagavan says, one who knows me, Mamupetya, one who knows me, comes to that new birth, or at least keeps me as the goal, comes to know me. So moving from our Dukh Alaya, abode, and dukha, sorrow. Dukh alaya world, which is ashashvatam, temporary, to move to samsiddhim paramam. Second line is the whole journey of evolution. So when we say, where am I in spiritual evolution, spiritual growth, this is the whole journey. From dukh alaya, temporary ashashvatam, to samsiddhim paramam, to that moksha. That's the whole journey. Okay, but are there others who, having reached even that highest moksha, do you think some of them come back? What do you think? So let's see. Verse 16. Abrahma bhuvanal lokaha punaravartinorjuna mamupetya sukanteya punarjanma na vedyate. It is said in our scriptures that there are 14 worlds, 7 below and 7 above. So if we are going into the worlds, that is, they are not places, they are not geographical places, they are planes of existence. Yeah. So they are different planes of existence. Now in those planes, so we may go to Devlok and then to Pitralok, to Bhutalok, and therefore we are in Bhutalok actually, the world of matter. But right up to Brahmalok, that is the highest, up to Brahmalok, yes, there is rebirth. We can come back because all the worlds up to Brahmalok are subject to coming back. Why? Because we may have done tremendous amount of spiritual practice towards moksha, freedom, liberation, nirvana, whatever you call it. But you know, there is this baggage of previous karma, phala and vasana, which is pushing that pressure, that momentum, is still pushing us once again back into earth. And so when we come back into life, and if we get a human birth, then we are in a position to exhaust that vasana. So what is the purpose of this life? Oh, just to exhaust the previous vasana. So if I have a vasana for art, or for business, or for social work, or for studies, or for teaching, all that we are supposed to do is exhaust it, finish it off, because the momentum of it or the pressure of it was so much that we were compelled to do what we are doing right now. Remember, what we have chosen to do is our compulsion from our previous vasana pressure, and therefore when it is pressing, we have to do it and we complete it. Be careful not to gather any new pressure, any new vasana or sanskara that I want this, I want that. The moment we are collecting more and more of desires, we are setting ourselves up for coming back over and over again. So just to exhaust this momentum, yes, we have to come back. And so even the rishis, the munis, even the so-called realized souls, they may have come back for one or two last few lives just to complete the task. You know, like the boss who stays back in the office and says, okay, just a few more hours, let me complete this. And then I'm free. I'm going to resign, or I'm going to, it's a kind of resignation. It's a kind of exiting the world. So we must exit this whole chakra of Janma and Mrityu by resigning, by retiring from it completely. And how do you retire? When you retire when you have completed your task. So just complete it, don't add any more to it. So in 16 it is said, yes, some of them do come back, but from Brahmalok. If you reach Brahmalok, yes, then there is no coming back. Just as we create new desires and we come back into new Janma. That new Janma is in our microscopic world akin to creation, and the death is akin to dissolution. When you look at the microcosmic pattern, so in our microcosmic pattern, each Janma is a creation and each Mrityu is a dissolution of that. In the macrocosmic, in Bhagwan's, in Brahma's world, the same Janma and Mrityu happens, which we call Pralaya and Prabhava, creation and dissolution. The same pattern happens. How? Well, we know the scientific story. The world expands, and finally it begins to contract once again, and then it crunches up into one big ball of dark matter in a dark hole or black hole as they call it, the physicists. And what is in that black hole? No one knows yet. And then after millions of years, a big bang, because again it starts expanding, and that big bang is again the macrocosmic. It's like saying Brahma opened his eyes again and he woke up. Now this is just an allegorical way of speaking, but it is also a scientific way in which the universe operates. So the expansion and dissolution of the world, creation and dissolution is part of it. Is like waking and dying. It's also taking birth and dying, but it is also akin to sleeping and waking up. It's the same pattern. Why is there such a comparison made? You may wonder. Okay, so I'm going to quote verse 70. How long does it take for the world to sleep and awaken? Sahasra yuga paryantam aharyad brahmano viduhu ratrim yuga sahasrantam teho ratra vido janaha. You know that the rishis, what the scientists are now beginning to find out, they found out through intuitive meditative practice, and they got it revealed to them. What was that revelation? That there are 4 yugas: Kalyug, Dwapar, Treta and Satya. Kalyug is roughly equivalent to 432 years, and Dwapar Yug again 4 lakh, approximately 4 lakh years into 2, and Treta into 3, that is multiplied by 3, and Satya Yug 4 lakh multiplied by 4. So altogether, if you take these 4 yugas, they constitute roughly 43 lakh years. Now you multiply that by 1000, and that constitutes 1 day of Brahma, 1 waking day of Brahma, which means what? That waking day is the way the cosmos is, with all the planets and all the planetary bodies and stars in the sky, and including our planet, and all the constellations and galaxies, and there are millions of suns like our sun, you know that. So our sun is in our galaxy, but there are so many galaxies, that means so many suns, and this entire spaceless cosmos, it takes Sahasra Yuga Paryantam. So it's 143 lakh years into 1000 is 1 waking day. The existence of this cosmos is 1, this is 43 lakhs and 1000 years is 1 waking day of Brahma. Now what happens to the same amount of time that it remains sleeping after it expands and then it dissolves, or it begins to crunch up and then dissolve? It takes an equal amount of time in that sleep. So 1 night in that sleep, meaning the cosmos remaining in that black hole or black space or dark energy, or I don't know how the physicists describe it, but that is where the whole universe or cosmos remains for an equal number of human years. We're counting in human years, but that is Brahma's 1 night. So the night stands for dissolution and day stands for creation. How is the world created? So the world is created by waking up. Now, what is happening in when we, let's take a simple example, make it simple. When we fall asleep and we are in deep sleep, what has happened to that jiva that we are? What has happened to the personality of that jiva, who may be, in waking time, you may say the nature of that personality is introverted, extroverted, calm or passionate, angry or calm and collected, santusht or extremely restless, whatever. Everyone has a personality. And all our temperaments and inclinations and impressions and tendencies, including our name, our gender, where is it? In our deep sleep, everything has collapsed into avyakta. It is there because you still exist. You haven't died. You still exist, even after death, of course, we can't die. but it remains, this whole bundle of our personality remains avyakta. Avyakta means unmanifest. It folds up into a seed form or a causal form, and therefore in a dormant form. It remains dormant. The moment we wake up, the first thought is of what am I to do next? Where is my next meeting? Why is my job not going too well? What happened to that project? I was supposed to get that project. How good is my bank balance? Why did that relative say that to me? The thoughts have become manifest, but the same thoughts have become manifest as the personality that went to sleep. But in deep sleep it is dormant, and in waking it is the same which is manifest. It's exactly the same with creation and dissolution, pralaya and prabhava. At the cosmic level, we see that when the world comes into with the Big Bang, when it comes into being, all the planets and all the bodies and all these pieces of rock which we call planets, and they come into being, and then the building blocks like helium and hydrogen, building blocks of life. Not all the planets have life, but these building blocks of life originate on some planets. So helium and hydrogen and all the chemical churning of all these chemicals, life begins once again from this chemical soup. From that chemical soup we have originated, by the way, through millions and millions of years. That's why this body, if you cut it down and ask a doctor, he'll say, yeah, it's only carbon and hydrogen and stuff like that, and calcium. Yes, so our body is still that same chemical soup of carbon and calcium, nothing more than that. But what about us? We also go into a kind of a dormant state, and we awaken once again into the same personality as before our sleep and after our sleep. What about after death? Exactly the same. We awaken, that means into our next life, after death, with the same imprint of the personality. So I cannot say that I'm going to indulge in all kinds of actions and all kinds of greed and anger, and I hope next morning I wake up very saintly and very spiritual and in a very meditative mood, and with a sense of forgiveness and compassion. No, we will not. This doesn't happen. So also after death. So in this life, whatever we are doing, we will reawaken, so to say, reawaken into a new Janma with the same personality. Therefore, every thought is actually gathering an imprint. We know this theory well enough. It's just that we are not living up to it. We're not living our day-to-day life in congruence with this understanding. And we still live as if we will live forever, and I will still react to the people and Vyakti and Parasthiti and situations and ups and downs. I will continue to react. Why? This is unjust to me. Arjuna is reacting to the situation in the battlefield. And therefore Krishna needs to remind him, Arjuna, there's no need to react. Because you as a person, you don't have a so-called death. But yes, what goes over is your personality. So mind what you think and what you do. That is the only wealth and the only way to gain freedom and go beyond. So for example, if you see a doctor or a dacoit or a saint or a selfish person sleeping, or a thief sleeping, in that sleeping state, do they know the difference between themselves? Who's the saint? Who's the sinner? Who's the doctor? Who's the dacoit? Who's the thief? And who's the philanthropist? No. Even they don't know. Because there is no difference. Their entire personality has collapsed into a dormant seed causal form. And when they awaken, the same personality awakens again. Therefore, it is said in verse 19, I must do 18 first. Avyaktavyakya sarvaha prabhavantyah ragame ratyagame praliyante tatraivapyakta sangyake. From the unmanifested, all the manifest again proceeds. So when the cosmic prabhava, that means creation happens, once again it happens in the same state, the same building blocks of helium and calcium and carbon and hydrogen, the same things have to create the earth again, and our personality in the same way. So these two examples tell us that what about Abrahma Bhuvanal Lokaha in this verse? 16th verse actually. Brahma Bhavana Lokaha. Up to the world of Brahma, there will always be the same cycle of dissolution and creation, of waking and sleeping or dormant state. And so we are all subject to rebirth. Except when Mamupesya, in the 16th verse, Mamupesya means except when you reach me. I am timeless, changeless, eternal, infinite, present. There is no sense of space or time or naam or roop or personality or jiva. You are just pure consciousness. In the 18th verse, so from avyakta to vyakta, unmanifest to manifest, we have seen this. It's a figurative way of explaining that when Brahma goes to sleep, the world goes into pralaya. It's just a figurative way of saying the universe just contracts. In fact, this had been mentioned also in chapter 2. Chapter 2 also has the essence of every bit of knowledge which is elaborated in the rest of the chapters. In the other chapters, we see only an elaboration of it. So in chapter 2, verse 28, we saw Avyaktadini Bhutani Vyaktamadhyani Bharata. Hey Arjun, what are you worrying about death and about this battle and about the death of your favorite great-grandfather Bhishma Pitama and your teacher favorite Dronacharya and the death of your loved one? Why? Because they are only Vyakta now for a brief period of time. So are you, Arjun. It's just a madhyama, in between being vyakta or manifest. And again you go back to avyakta. Avyakta nidhananyeva tatra ka paridevana. Tatra ka paridevana. What is the grief all about? Krishna had already asked Arjuna in chapter 2. What are you sorrowing over? Because in terms of the process of dissolution and creation, we are the same as the cosmic dissolution and creation. What is it that does not die and therefore is able to come forth again in cosmic terms when prabhava happens, creation happens? It is the same consciousness which remains. Because in pralaya and dissolution it had gone nowhere. It still existed independent of the world of matter. World of matter, it does not depend on. So Arjun, you don't depend on the world of matter or either. What is the sorrow about when you are actually free? And secondly, in terms of the scale of time, the scale of time in the cosmos, which goes on for millions and millions of years, and again, the whole creation and dissolution, the cycle is repeated. What is your life in that scale? In that scale, your life is a one minuscule, the 60, 80, how long did he live? 100 or so, or 80, 90 years. Arjun. It is a minuscule speck of time. Minuscule. In that minuscule speck of time, what is your tatra ka paridevana? What is your grief all about? As Krishna fails to even understand what the grief is all about. If Arjun were to understand that everything, including the cosmos and our little bodies, our little petty bodies, is just made up of all the building blocks of all the chemicals that make up the world of matter, and then we go back into the merge into the same consciousness. For example, a bulb. A bulb is lit up by electricity. Now the bulb is broken. My body is gone. I am dead. No, but where is the light gone? The light has merged back to the electricity which was powering it. That's all. Light is not gone anywhere. Kahan gayi? Roshni kahan gayi? It has merged back with electricity. It will come back only when there is a body. So even electricity even light needs a medium, and our body is that medium to become the manifest. Otherwise, it's always existent. Electricity is always existent, but light needs a medium, like a body. So all the above elements of time, space, name, form, everything that you can name and which you call yourself or your world or your sansar or our success or our failure or our possessions, everything goes back to the seed form, causal form or dormant form. Karan Sharir in Vedic language is called Karan Sharir or Bij form. So, for example, this example will come a little later. We'll just see verse 19. भूतग्रामस एवायं भूत्वा भूत्वा प्रलीयते रात्र्यागमे वशः पाथ प्रभवत्यः रागमे. It says that the same multitude of beings is being born again and again and is dissolved into the unmanifest again and again. What is this same multitude of beings means what? It's a figurative way of saying the same personality impressions are going into the dormant state and arising as the same personality trait in the next life. So again and again. But in what way? In a Bhutangamu Shaivayam Bhutva Bhutva Praliyate. Avashaha. It means it is happening helplessly. We cannot help it. We cannot help but be born with the same kind of personality and inclinations and desires and predilections as we had in our previous lives. That is what is carrying us forward. That means what? That means we have this incapacity. We seem to have this incapacity to disinherit our own past. कि भाई एक पिछला इतने जन्मों का एक प्रभाव, एक influence is like a burden on me and it is casting a shadow in my path. Yes, it is casting a shadow because when I break into anger or lust or passion or revengefulness or resentment, it is a shadow and I can't help it. ये मेरे सामने shadow है मेरे वासना का and of my past sanskar. What should I do with it? I can't walk straight. I can't walk in the light. So Bhagavan says, when you turn to the light of knowledge, when you understand this knowledge, that it is your own vasana, your own doing, your own karma phal, which could have been altered and which can be altered right now. And you, who are you? Just consciousness, the same pure divine light of which Brahma is made. The moment we know this knowledge, that knowledge puts this shadow behind us and we walk in the light. The shadow is not gone, remember. We will still be forced to act the way we are acting or to like or dislike the kind of things we are liking or disliking. We cannot shake it off, but that shadow is now behind us. It's falling behind us because in front we have put the lamp of knowledge. And that lamp of knowledge is now falling on our face, the shadow of Vasana behind us, still burdening us, still following us, but now we are in the path of light. And therefore, walking in the path of light, we realize that we can free ourselves. We have the ability to free ourselves. So, and we also realize that it's not possible for me to be consistently, satatam, nityashaha, consistently pursuing pleasures, consistently pursuing competitiveness, consistently being unbridled in my materialism and consumerism. And one fine morning I wake up, with austerity. And what is that fine morning? It can be a new janma. And that new janma, I am full of humility and austerity and simplicity and honesty and mumukshutva. Mumukshutva, desire for moksha. No, I will not wake up one fine morning with these qualities, having been in unbridled materialism in the previous life. Therefore, that's the important point to catch. All about Prabhava and Pralaya. Everything goes into dormant state. Everything reawakens with the same building blocks. Just as the building blocks of the sansar are all this whole chemical soup of of hydrogen and helium. Our building blocks are the vasanas we carry of the qualities, our temperament, our tendencies and our impressions. So, another example given is that of how the nature follows a certain law, that a frog will breed frog and humans will breed humans naturally. It's the law, right? And a mango seed will sprout into a mango tree. And we had also seen the example of a sunflower seed which had the aspiration to become a rose plant, but it cannot, because in the deep in the vasana of the sunflower seed lies embedded the vasana of a sunflower shape and size and color and fragrance. It is embedded, that vasana. So also the thoughts. Each thought that we have breeds more thoughts of its own kind, of the same kind. So if we are extremely pleasure seeking or materialistic or taking advantage of others, or let's say emotionally too dependent, and happiness seeking, extroverted in the outside world, each thought is going to breed a thought of a similar kind. You see, thoughts of the same nature will arise in the mind, and so we are sort of carried away in the current of our own thoughts. What is the solution? Solution is, I'm coming one big circle back to meditation. It has been said by the masters, and even if we have not experienced it, we must believe the masters, that in the deep state of meditation or in samadhi, that is the point at which there is a break. There is a break, a complete severance from the previous vasana baggage and from our association with this nama rupa body and with our association with all the sansar that we know it as it is. And when that breaks, there is no sense of space, time, tendencies, likes, dislikes, raga, dvesha. In your deep sleep, do you know your raga, dvesha? I'm attached to so and so, I love so and so, I detest so and so. There is no such thought. So that is the one plane of existence, the one refuge we have, the one escape route, let's say, that we have, where we can escape this, the tyranny of the sansaric cycle of pushing us back and back into the same vortex of the same nature of thoughts and actions, and the same kind of thoughts leading to similar kind of actions, and the actions creating their own vasanas, and that whole cycle, that vortex in which we are caught. That is being called as Janma Bandhan. Breaking it is called Janma Bandhan Mukti. These are the two terms which people use loosely, but this is the entire explanation of it. So all the outer freedom that we look for, all that outer freedom is actually just superficial. So what is the one way to escape our world of desires? Because everything arises from desires. I'm coming back to square one again. Everything arises from desires, and therefore there is one simple sutra, and it sounds like a very paradoxical sutra, and the sutra is that इतनी आकांक्षाएं जब मुझे बांधे रख रही हैं इस संसार से, इस दुनिया में, कि वापस आओ, क्योंकि ये आकांक्षा पूरी नहीं हुई और वो आकांक्षा पूरी नहीं हुई, तब हमारे पास एक ही रिकॉर्स रह जाता है, आकांक्षाओं को त्याग दो। आकांक्षाओं की पूर्ति मुझे करना है। मैं इस थॉट के साथ घूमता रहता हूँ दुनिया में, like Nasruddin's donkey in the marketplace, crazy with desire and excitement of the संसार। आकांक्षाओं को पूर्ति करना हो तो आकांक्षाओं को त्याग दो। As simple as that. Paradoxical सूत्र। अरे it sounds like उल्टा। और इसीलिए कहा गया हुस्न आरज़ू का राज यही है, एक ही है हुस्न आरज़ू का राज। ये राज कि तर्क आरज़ू। तर्क आरज़ू मीन्स You can just give up the desires and you're free. And we keep thinking, I will be free from that akanksha and that desire and that project when I fulfill it. And that never happens, because there's a new one arising and a new one after that. So by fulfilling the desires, we are not free of the desires. It's just the opposite. We are free. है husle arzu ka raaj, tarke arzu. Give up the desires, the freedom is yours. And right ahead, we are going to see what is it that needs to be done in verse number